What's up, Goon Squad? It's your boy back again, NOLAGOLD, here with an updated casino guide. Yes, patch 1.6, a lot of changes to the game, changes to the meta, so there's definitely changes to the casino deck. So casino, the biggest changes have been the changes to the discard cards. We're talking about the Urchin and the Sump Dredger. These cards used to be you discard a card to play them. And the Urchin, when it died, you would get that card back, but now you just get the card back whenever you play it and discard a card. Why this is such a big impact and why this is going to be a big boon for a deck like Casino is really in the leveling up of Jinx. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I just want to let you know that I did a 1-hour guide on this deck. It's linked down below in the details. If you want an in-depth guide, that's going to be 1.5. And I'm just doing this as an update, but to give you the too long didn't watch, although you can click it, so I get some views and I'll get a bunch more views. And if for no other reason than validate me spending time making videos, playing this sweet deck, just click that link down below. Or you can watch that video, which will give you an in-depth guide on every single card, how it interacts with the other cards. But to give you the too long didn't watch, like I said, basically this deck is all about leveling up your champions. Twisted Fate, you want to draw a bunch of cards. Jinx, you want to have no cards in your hand. Seems like they're at odds with one another, but when your card draw and the most powerful card in the deck is Rummage, it's not that hard to really tie the two together. Mainly Rummage, there's some tricks to Rummage. If you Rummage with no cards in hand, you go down to 0 before you draw a card, so that'll level up Jinx. And of course, drawing 2 cards is going to help level up your Twisted Fate. And then we tie that into the new changes to the discard effects. If we have just the Urchin in our hand, or we play a Sump Dredger, we pitch a card, go to 0, level up the Jinx, and then draw a card. Or we're just using it to draw cards with Twisted Fate. So either way, we're just trying to level our champions with this deck. And we consider Slotbot as like a pseudo champion in this deck, because Slotbot levels up every turn, gets +1 in the stats, and then shuffles every round. So drawing a bunch of cards is going to be playing into the TF and Slotbot, and this thing could get out of hand. It could be 69, nice. And now this thing should be swole. Yeah, 6-9, nice! Nice! Oh yeah, dude, nice! It could be, huge. Oh, you get the 110, you get what's the craziest slot you get on your Slotbot? I'd love to know in the comments down below. But basically, we're using Slotbot, Twisted Fate, Jinx, and we're using a lot of draw effects to make that work. The deck is honestly very reactive. It can have a very proactive track. It can look like a very serious aggro deck, especially when you have Flame Chompers just taking out blockers while you're pushing through a lot of damage. When you play a bunch of draw effects with the Astute Academic, you can push a lot of damage early in the game. But generally, you want to play this deck, keeping your options open. Obviously, Twisted Fate having 3 different cards. When you play it, gives you a lot of options, as well as just drawing a lot of cards. And then deciding what to discard is really tough, depending on different matchups. But hopefully I can clear some of that up today, especially in 1.6. We're going to go over the meta. And remember, if you like this video and you get something out of this, then make sure you hit that subscribe button, the notification bell for more videos on new sweet decks, because I never like playing tier 1 decks, and I love playing juicy brews, and this deck has been nothing but. So, big changes to the deck are the Urchin on 1. This is really cool. An important note, whenever you play the Urchin, if you have the even attack turn, if you're on evens, I guess is what the Zoomers would say for Legends of Runeterra, you want to play the Urchin on your second turn, not on your first turn. This deck doesn't have many 2-drops. As a matter of fact, none, other than maybe Mystic Shot, their thing. So you want to play the Urchin on turn 2. Generally, this is because we're playing this card Suit Up. One of the most powerful cards in the deck. I'm actually thinking about maybe even playing Pocket Aces because of how good this type of effect, just being able to buff your Twisted Fate, keep it alive, buff your Jinx, buff anything whenever you are pushing for damage, be able to buff your Flame Chompers because it has Challenger to really use that as a form of removal. So the Suit Up is turned off if we play the Urchin on turn 1. So we'll draw for turn. We didn't draw a Suit Up if we play Urchin on turn 1. And we draw a Suit Up, you're just going to feel bad. So to really maximize having Suit Up in our deck, make sure you play the Urchin on turn 2, especially if you're pitching Flame Chompers or something like Jury Rig, you can suit up something else and then be pushing with 2 different things. Like, suiting up a Flame Chompers is just really strong. But overall, the whole purpose of the deck is to level up TF or Jinx and then just maximize the value that they create. Jinx on the backside, drawing you an extra card, and of course Twisted Fate on the backside, just playing a bunch of Destiny cards each round, and then drawing a bunch of cards to make your slot buy bigger. We do get to push for a good amount of damage, like I said, with the Academic, especially with the excessive amount of draw between pick a card, Twisted Fate's pick a card, level up Jinx drawing extra cards, Brash Gambler drawing cards, and then now the addition of Sump Dredger and Urchin just drawing extra cards. So the Academic does push for a lot of damage. We still, I've reduced the number of Pool Sharks. I think this could even possibly go down to 1, just because we have a more aggressive version. And the Urchin that actually you will have trouble getting punished from playing the Urchin, where the Pool Shark you can draw something fleeting and then not be able to use it, and then it's just like not very well statted or aggressively statted, where this deck really wants to turn the corner sometimes. It is good for a chump block if you're trying to set up a TF level up and then some kind of big combo massive board. That's one thing. But really, I think the Urchin's just a strict upgrade to the Pool Shark in many circumstances. I do like the Pool Shark to come down and get the chump block, but I'm thinking that, given the amount of units we have, we might be able to go down to the Pool Sharks and then maybe get some more tricks and play like Pocket Aces, which I haven't tried yet. But for the most part, you want to add the Urchin to the deck. Dredger is one that you want to play with the numbers. It's really tough to add a bunch of these to your deck because it really competes with the slot bot at the same mana cost. And then generally on turn 4 and upwards, you're wanting to play Twisted Fate and Jinx and you maximize your mana, Brash Gambler. So being 3 mana and not being any spell mana makes it kind of difficult. Although I do like it in some matchups where you want some board presence. Think any kind of Demacia deck where you really want to get something down that can trade. And then, its effect, like I said, plays well with Jinx. But I haven't been the biggest fan because of the amount of mana and what kind of body it actually produces. It is good for beating down. It might draw a removal spell to clear the way for Twisted Fate. Some are slot bot in a lot of matches, but for the most part, I think I would limit this number to maybe 2. But it's really hard to make cuts in this deck because you kind of want a lot of this. Like pick a card, if you notice this list compared to previous, cut 1, pick a card. Pick a card is a great card, but I wanted to get the Sump Treasure in here because, early pick cards don't really give you much board presence, and you really need that against aggressive decks. Also, like I said, the suit up, very big in this deck. And pick a card's good, but Get Excited and Mystic Shot really give you some range as well as giving you removal. So I really don't want to play with those numbers too much. Get Excited is also very important when it comes to leveling up Jinx, being able to play it and discard a card. And of course, Rumminch is the best card in the deck because it levels up both their champs and slot bot, and also enables a lot of our discard effects like Jury Rig and Flame Chompers. So very powerful effect. I can't really cut that. I could see if you wanted to maybe cut a Jury Rig or a Flame Chompers, you could have one of the discard outlets go down. Although I don't think that's where you can make a cut either. So it's looking at like Pool Shark or maybe messing with the Student Academics. I thought that maybe we can cut all the Brash Gamblers and play Sump Treasures, but after some testing, Brash Gambler just does too much work against the mid-range and control decks. It's hard to remove whenever it first comes down to 4/5, especially with the 1.6 patch. The nerf to Will has really been a boon for the Brash Gambler overall. There's less Will being played around, which is the most punishing card against a card that requires you to discard 2 cards to play. So this is kind of close to optimal, I think. I do want to try Pocket Aces, and again, just remember that the most flexible spots here are going to be the Sump Dredger, possibly a suit up. You can maybe go down on Pool Shark, and you can use those as your flex spots to really add whatever else you want. If you want to go up on more tricks with more Pocket Aces, if you want to have more board presence, play more Sump Dredger. If you're facing a lot of Demacia, it allows you to get something down and then trade as well. And overall, I think this is pretty close to an optimal list for the casino deck. So one thing that I left out on my last video, I didn't go in depth on mulligans. So let's talk about matchups and mulligans. I did talk about matchups before, but I didn't go too much into mulligans. If you want a general rule for mulliganing with this deck, an optimal hand, we're talking about 4 cards here, is one of your champions. Think Jinx, Twisted Fate, and again, Slotbot. Like I say, Slotbot is like a champion in this deck. So you want one of your champions, you want some early interaction, be it Mystic Shot or, like an Urchin where you can block, and then you generally want one discardable card, I think, like a Jury Rig or a Flame Chompers in your hand. So then you have something to discard, you have something to work towards champion wise, and then you also have little board presence or game actions leading up to your turn 4 champion or your slot bot. So that's where I would start with this. General guidelines though is you always want to mulligan the suit up because it has the cost reduction when you draw from your hand and you draw from your deck for the turn, whereas having it in your opening hand is just going to be 4 mana. So always mulligan your suit up. And you always keep Rummage in your hand. Because like I said, it's the card that ties the whole engine together. It's really the best card in the deck. It allows for the most explosive plays. Double Rummage draws with Twisted Fate can really have a surprise level up. So definitely keep Rummage in your hand. And always mulligan your suit up. Brash Gambler and what champion keep in your hand, you really don't want to be flooded on these 4-drops. So I think you should opt to have one. And when we get into matchups later, I'll discuss exactly which champions and what cards, what 4-drop you really want in each particular matchup to focus on through mulligans. The most popular deck right now is probably Midrange Frostbite, both in tournaments and on the ladder. Has Sejuani, a lot of value, a lot of sturdy units, a lot of board presence, and a big sweeper in Reckoning. You do see Reckoning played in multiples. Most times you'll see 2 in a deck, Reckoning. This is going to be the most powerful card against you, being able to wipe out everything but a level up Jinx or a high rolled slot bot. So playing around this card is of the utmost importance in this match. Sometimes you just can't beat it and you just gotta play and be as aggressive as possible and just hope they don't have it. But this is probably the biggest page turner whenever it comes to Ash trying to close the game on us. Aside from that, our Piltover base removal is all damage based, so the high toughness threats are a little difficult for us to remove, so we end up having to race. So generally, I would say Suit Up is one of the best cards. Being able to actually pump your unit beyond their removal. Calling Strike is going to be aimed at your slot bots early. It also takes out just about anything in your deck with Jinx, and then it is very good at just killing your Twisted Fate before it can level. So if we can save or have a timely Suit Up to really get our TF outside Culling Strike range, that is very important. It's kind of hard to use Suit Up in aggressive terms because the opponent has so much freeze between Brittle Steel. They also have big enough units that the 4/4 is going to be lucky if it trades with, one of the many 5 power things that this deck is presenting against us. So generally you want to use your Suit Up in that situation, try and set it up to where you can counter a Culling Strike with it, or you can get your unit to possibly survive a Reckoning. And the way you do that is if you can put it on Astute Academic, and then whenever you draw a card, that'll go to 5 power. So you want to focus on using the Suit Up on that, or using it for value plays with Flame Chompers to be able to maybe get a 2-for-1, be able to eat a Trapper or Icefield Archer or Omen Hawk, and then still have the unit around to be able to get something else, or maybe a block and trade with Kato. You need to get the most value out of your Suit Up there. Otherwise, just save it to counter a Culling Strike. Think about it as a 4-mana deny for the Culling Strike, unless you're really pushing hard and have already turned the corner and you're just piling on with it. You want to make sure you use your Suit Up in that situation. Also, whenever we look at Mystic Shot and Get Excited, those cards, they don't kill much from your opponent. If you can get excited to Ash and just kind of slow down their board development, then that's worth doing. Just to decrease the pressure on you. But generally, you want those removal spells for Trifiri and Glory Seeker. That's like the #1 target because they're going to be using Glory Seeker as one of their few ways of removing a suited up TF or a big Jinx. It's really hard for them to make us get into combat with that Jinx while we're firing rockets every turn. So always keep an eye on how much mana your opponent has. Do they have the attack token? And can they Glory Seeker your big threat that you're trying to hit? So be mindful of that. Save your damage to counter Glory Seekers. and then use it also go face, because these decks also play Tavern Keeper, so you're going to need as much reach as possible. The only other use, I think, for your removal spells is if your opponent is light on 5+ power units, then you can maybe soften one of their big units up and then remove the 5 power unit. If you can finish off a 5 power unit and they don't have multiples, it's good at not only making their assessors draw less cards, but also possibly turning off their reckoning. Also look for big plays to outplay your opponent where they might be stranded with a 5 power unit. You overload the board to where they have to kind of reckoning, or the reckoning just looks too good not to cast, and then you can fire multiple removal spells or a single removal spell to a damaged 5 power unit to really counter the reckoning, get them to use their reckoning, lose it, and then also remove their big threat on the board at the same time. So line up those plays is a little tough. You really got to think a couple turns ahead, but that's how Casino goes. One of the biggest mistakes I see novice Casino players make against this deck is attack with their Jinx. Never attack with Jinx. Never attack with Jinx. There's too many ways to get blown out by attacking with a Jinx. If an opponent has a high toughness threat, even if it would die to the quick attack, if they have a Elixir of Iron, then you'll lose your Jinx in that combat. Also, if your opponent has any kind of freeze, especially an unleveled Jinx, they can easily Brittle Steel it. Generally, Brittle Steel is going to be a dead draw for your opponent, so do not let it be a card. You basically gain card advantage by making your cards worthless, and one of the best ways to do it is just not engage in combat with them. And that's why it's important to save removal for the only challenger. That's why we want to target Glory Seeker with any removals, because we don't have to get our champions into combat with them, or we can't win in a combat step against freezes and pumps like Fury, Elixir, Brittle Steel, Harsh Winds. So keep that in mind. Don't fall into that trap. It's one of the hardest decks in the game, so hopefully this is an insight to one of the most popular matches. Whenever we mulligan, I don't think you want any of the removal early. You want to make sure that you're pretty dense on threats, either TF or Jinx. Either one is fine. Slotbot is really good in combination with either one of those, because the Slotbot, especially with TF, will generally eat that Culling Strike before it rolls, especially from players that are just scared of Slotbot. The Slotbot can get out of hand. It can get bigger than their units over time. So if they have a Culling Strike, they're pretty inclined to actually Culling Strike your thing. Having a Slotbot, being able to eat that for your TF is strong. And then, of course, just general mulligan tips that I mentioned earlier. Outside of that, I would not keep any removal in your hand in your opener. I would actively mulligan it away. Don't try and do a Mystic Shower or get excited. They're fine if you're in your hand if you get them back, but it's not what you're really looking for in your opener. Like I said, in your opener, look for Slotbot, look for your 4-drops, and you should be fine with that. Another more popular deck is the Scouts or Demacia-based aggro decks, generally Bannerman-based. These decks are very aggressive, and they look to be very unit board heavy to be able to take advantage of the Bannerman. In this match, you're kind of playing the combo control role, so you want to make sure that you're dealing with your opponent's threats as best as you can, while also trying to level up your champions as fast as possible. Try and get blocks in when you can. The one good thing about this deck is that most of the game is just on the board. This list is not the most common, I would say, but many people are a little bit lower on Salem Combats, but they do play the Relentless Pursuit to be able to rally. So that's one thing to look out for, is the rally. Even though it has been nerfed in 1.6 to be a slow spell, it is still very impactful if they get to attack multiple times in a turn, or get to attack whenever you think that they can't on your own combat. This is very important, especially if your opponent has multiple challengers. You want to mulligan for any removal that you can get and some meaningful piece of champion. So looking for Slotbot, these are general. Looking for Slotbot, TF, or Jinx. I think TF is better than Jinx because this is a removal light deck. Most of their removal is going to be on board via challenger, so we can interact with that with our own removal. But we definitely want to try and level up that Twisted Fate, because then we start doing board spams. And since they can't really interact with it that well outside of challengers, or one of the few single combats they might have in their deck, it's going to be our go-to champion to level. Slotbot is really good, especially if we can play it in tandem with Twisted Fate, because we'll be drawing some cards. The Slotbot will get big, and generally slot bot can get bigger than what they have. Watch out for, be very heads up against Bannerman plays. If we have removal that lines up real well against something like a Lucian or a Senna, if they're playing the Lucian version of Demacia, if we have that Mystic Shot and they have 4 mana, instead of giving them priority, just fire off the Mystic Shot first, because if you slow the game down and you keep the board a little small, then it really makes cards like Genevieve and Bannerman a lot less effective on the turns that they would normally play them. So, just try and maintain a board presence as best you can. Suit up is really big here because you can get a 2-for-1 out of the suit up. If you get a suit up on a block and then kill something and stuff, 4 power to be able to trade later, it's going to make things difficult for your opponent. Do the trades as best as you can, and just continually try and level up your TF or your Jinx and roll that slot bot up. Play very defensive posturing, maintain as much board as you can, and then you'll really outvalue this deck over time. So wear them out like your control deck. One thing you might have noticed in patch 1.6 is the prevalence of Ezreal decks. Ezreal everywhere. The most popular of which is the Ezreal Twisted Fate deck. This deck looks to use steals, black market merchant, goods, and general damage removal that you see from Piltover and Ezreal decks. Not uncommon. Mystic Shot very clean at killing our TF and other of our smaller units. Thermogenic Beam killing anything pretty much at slow speed. And then really Riptide Rex turning on their Ezreal and their Twisted Fate. One important thing about this deck is their Ezreal probably isn't going to level till turn 8, so it gives you a lot of time to take advantage of the card advantage that you can generate, maintain board presence, and getting stolen from is not the worst. They do have Twisted Fate, which we play, so you should have a little understanding of how Twisted Fate works. Think about how they can play it to where they don't get the most benefit. And also, you can be wary of early Ezreal plays, because this is a matchup where a skilled Ezreal TF player will look to play their Ezreal earlier rather than later. They'll play it early to try and deal with our board presence and get advantage, to try and match the card advantage that we have so much of. And if they do, it will be good to actually have a Get Excited. So if you have a Get Excited, it's probably worth keeping against an early Ezreal drop. And then just general board presence early, because one way to lose this game is early Jagged Butcher or multiple Jagged Butchers, because them Jagged Butchers can come down as 3/3s and really get them off your back and not have to give up too much value by having to block it twice, and really turning off their Pilfer engine by removing them. We want to go ahead and have it Get Excited in our opener. So in this matchup, I don't mind keeping it Get Excited, or possibly even a Mystic Shot. The most important thing is just trying to maintain board presence. They have a lot of removal. Slot bot is the biggest priority because they don't have a lot of clean kills on it other than Thermogenic Beam. Make them have to beam on turn 4. It can get big. Make them have to have a beam for your slot bot where you're just continuing drawing more cards and piling on. They don't do a good job of removing 4 more toughness outside of Thermogenic Beam. So don't get your units in combats. Use your life tool as a resource, because again, they're not going to be able to finish you until later in the game. We're talking about Riptide Rex. So don't give up an important piece like a Jinx. Get a Jinx blocking because it looks fine, because they can easily finish off your units with Static Shock, Mystic Shot, Make It Rain, Twisted Fate red card, Twisted Fate gold card. So maintain your important pieces, Brash Gambler, pretty much all your 4-drops and slot bot by not throwing them away with frivolous combats, unless it's very meaningful. Like I said, them stealing cards from you is not going to be that big of a deal, because we are drawing more cards than our opponent generally. So know the important pieces, your champions, and focus on those. This, just like the Sejuani match, we want to use our suit up to really counter our opponent's removal, let them commit something to try and remove one of our pieces, and then use the suit up. That's how you really make a blowout in this matchup, is your suit up plays. So make sure you put them in the right things. Generally, if you're in the mid to late game, if we're talking like turn 5, turn 6, and we draw a suit up, unless you're doing something really huge like putting it on a Flame Chomper and eating an Ezreal or a Twisted Fate, then I would not make the play. I would just wait till they commit for you to actually spend 4 mana. Because remember that a lot of our cards are cheap, and we draw a lot of them. So if we have to spend the full 4 mana on it the next turn, especially if we were banking mana by not playing it right now, that's a very important line in this deck that you need to really consider in this match. Another deck that has seen a resurgence in the 1.6 patch, I think largely due to the meta, is Endure. You could say Endure Spiders if you want. There's not many spiders in this deck other than Elise, but the Endure Elise Callista. In this matchup, we want to make sure that we mulligan to get excited. It's one of the best cards because it takes out both your champs. Make sure that you play out the first couple turns to where you don't get too far behind early. If you have a 1-drop, don't play it on turn 1 unless your opponent's coming with a serious Ravenous Butcher play on turn 1, especially if you have to get excited in hand, because being able to get excited in Elise on turn 2 or banking the 3 mana and be able to kill an Elise on turn 3 is very important. Get a slot bot out there early because that'll have really good board presence. Use your life total as a resource whenever they apply a caretaker. Don't throw units away into it. You're going to be able to outvalue this deck strong, and your opponent's going to have the top deck to be able to beat you. So make sure we look for Get Excited. Make sure that we're looking for one of our champions to level up. That's what we want to see in our openers. And as far as removal goes, Mystic Shot's a lot worse than Get Excited, so I would mulligan your Mystic Shots. There's nothing worth killing because everything wants to die anyway. And just focus on putting enough pressure on your opponent to where maybe you can have a level TF or a Jinx that's ready to blow up a They Who Endure board on turn 7. That way you can just shoot them down, stun them down with a TF gold card, or just generally push for lethal by turn 7. They Who Endure is a unit that we really can't remove, so we have to race. So keep that in consideration. Do not trade too much early. Sometimes you get a slot bot rolled up big enough to where it can block one hit from the They Who Endure, so you can push for lethal on the next turn. But you really want to get that TF or that Jinx leveled up as soon as possible. But luckily, this deck doesn't play any removal outside of Atrocity or Fury of the North for our important parts. So don't get in combat if they have 4 mana up. If a Fury of the North is going to get blowout, and the matchup should be pretty easy, so long as you can maintain a board presence early. Again, that's very easy to do if you get that slot bot down early, you get that suit up, or if you have a Get Excited, it's where they can't steamroll you with the Callista early. A couple tricks to the gameplay in this match, though, is actually not killing their units early. That way, the They Who Endure doesn't get huge. Also, the Get Excited is very important because even if they don't come with Elise or Callista, one of the better cards against you is going to be the Neverglade Collector because the life gain on the Collector is huge. You really want to have that TF leveled up to where you can get a red card, proc with a Get Excited on Neverglade Collector to finish it off. Watch out because since we're using life total early to be able to build board presence, we're using our life total as a resource. We can possibly die to Fury of the North in the later stages of the game. So be very careful about how you block when you have a full board after you've already built a leveled up champion. Overall, I'd say this match was very favorable, and I haven't lost to it very much at all. So just follow them tips and enjoy the wins. Ezreal Karma is another deck that is kind of found its resurgence a couple of weeks into this patch because after the Will nerf, it was hit very hard and really fell out of favor with a lot of decks. I do like the fact that Casino can apply a lot of pressure early and across multiple bodies, which makes it difficult for the Ezreal Karma deck to really keep up. Sure, they have Mystic Shot and Thermal Beam, but if we can present multiple units coming off of a Jury Rig, off of a Rummage, and then a Suit Up, a timely Suit Up to counter one of their removal spells, you can really get out in front of this deck and really keep them off balance. And they really can't kill you until turn 8 or beyond. And we can match their card advantage with Deep Meditation. So we want to be the aggressor in this matchup and look to make them big suit up counter plays, as well as constantly having a good board presence and trying to level our champions as best as we can. It's really hard to keep a TF on board when you have Mystic Shot and things like Thermogenic Beam, Will of Ionia. So that array of removal, this array of removal is really good at removing our TF, even if it's with Will of Ionia before it can level up. So make sure that whenever we play the TF, we can actually try and level it in one turn rotation, or we have enough pressure that they have to really focus on other parts of our game plan to maybe give us a window to be able to cast multiple draw steps. Try and set up rummages, multiple rummages to level up your TF if TF is the champion that we're leveling. But generally, the Jinx is the champion that we really want. Jinx has got a higher toughness. It requires 3 damage to remove. Yes, they have a lot of stuns in this deck, so attacking Jinx isn't that strong. But if we level a Jinx and then start outdrawing our opponent by double, as well as making rockets, that's going to be a good key to victory. The Jinx, make sure that when you play it, you don't play it unless you can instantly level it whenever you play it, because it'll die to a lot of 3 damage removal that they might have. There's also Thermal Beam out there, so be wary of that. Thermal Beam is the cleanest kill, so if we can provide threats like Slotbot ahead of Jinx or TF to really force the Thermal Beams out of our opponent's hands, that will clear the way for our champions that will break their backs. So, Slotbot is very big. Even though we can get Will of Ionia, we're using Slotbot as really a distraction from the real threats. So we're looking in our openers, we're going to have a Slotbot with a 4-drop. It's very important. Don't go all in on Brash Gambler if they have mana up, because that Will of Ionia can punish you. Remember, it was nerfed for 5 mana, so that won't come up as often, but it is still something that you need to be mindful of. Thermo Beam and Will of Ionia. So try and play around those as best as you can. Bait them out with lesser threats if you can. Look for a Slotbot plus a 4-drop in your opener when you're champions. And mull away any removal that you have. We don't want Mystic Shot. We don't want anything like Get Excited. Sure, Get Excited can hit the Ezreal early, but we're less worried about that, more worried about actually just being more proactive. We don't want any reactive plays. We want to be as proactive as possible against a deck with this much removal. Overall, this matchup I feel is very favorable. Like I said, their in-game doesn't come in until turn 8, and as long as we can be as aggressive as possible and smart with our threat deployment, and then if we can turn the corner with a timely suit up, then it's very easy to snowball a win after that. Tempo Sejuani, both Misfortune and Sejuani, as well as Game Playing Sejuani decks have been popping back up, even with the nerf to Pilfer Goods. Some play the full Pilfer Goods, some don't. Overall, this deck is very aggressive with multiple 1-drops, very hard to block when they have Misfortune, and then of course has the super value of Sejuani. For this matchup, it's very important to be careful and mindful of the card Sejuani, because it can generally come down, it and other cards like it that give vulnerable are strong because they can be used to hit our champions before they level up or even after they level up. So be mindful of those cards. And then this matchup actually gets a little tough because of the nature of the aggressive draws that it can have. One shot in the Jagged Butcher, Omen Hawk and a double Jagged Butcher after hitting for 1 can be really tough and put you on the back foot early, and then you end up having to expend a lot of resources dealing with the board and not focusing on your own game plan. Try and stay on pace with what they're producing to the board as best as you can. And the one upside I'd say in this match, and which you're going to look to really take advantage of, is the fact that their deck does not play any removal outside of Vulnerable and Make It Rain. So they're not hitting any of our key threats for the most part with those effects, but they can still bulldoze you and then really, break your back whenever it comes to board position, and then finish you off with Riptide Rex. Also, we need since there is the inexistence of Riptide Rex in this deck, and like any other Riptide Rex deck, we need to respect it. Our deck does not deal with Riptide Rex that well, but luckily our deck can race it. So if we don't have to spend too much, dealing with our opponent's things early, like if we can get a good 2-for-1 out of a suit up, or dodge like bad blocks or very aggressive starts, then we can actually promote our own game plan and really take the game over before Riptide Rex even comes into play. This does make the match a little bit more draw dependent than I would like it to be, and it is tough when Sejuani can just check any of our series board elements. So we want to be leveling up 2 champions at one time. Twisted Fate and Jinx and Slotbot, any combination of the two, to really push our way into closing the game before Rex comes down, or winning as soon as Rex happens. So keep that in mind and try not to get run over. Definitely keep some removal in your opener. I like Get Excited if they're playing the Misfortune route. I like Mystic Shot if they're not. I like keeping one but not multiple removal spells just so that we don't fall too far behind and we can actually start building our own game plan beyond the first removal spell. Slotbot is huge. Remember, we're always looking to have Slotbot. I don't think there's a match where we don't have Slotbot and Champion in our hand. The rest of the cards don't matter too much. Never mulligan your Rummage, no matter what. With the multiple mid-range decks popping up in this meta and really being the majority of the format, it's not surprising to see Deep becoming more popular to prey on those decks. Good news for the casino players out there is that Deep really does not have that much removal for Twisted Fate. A lot of their removal is single damage. When we're talking about Wither and Whale and Valfuse, some of us don't even play Grasp, or they're really expensive with like Vengeance or Ruination. We really got to take advantage of that by being super aggressive with that Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate is the card that we're looking at mulligan into in this match. The level on the Twisted Fate is huge. The only thing to consider, much like the Sejuani match, keeping a Mystic Shot. Do not keep it in your opener, but if you draw one, make sure that it's only there to either kill his wall hunters or counter the effect of Devour the Depths by dealing damage to it. Because remember, when they play this, it obliterates an enemy with less health, so it checks on the resolution of the ability, and we can damage it before we really counter it from killing a Twisted Fate. If we apply enough pressure early, then our opponent could be on the back foot, so look for big, aggressive suit-up plays, especially with Flame Chompers. That's like suit-up's biggest friend. To tear through Thorny Toads, you could use Mystic Shot also for Dribbling Wander if we're pushing a lot of damage. Generally, if your opponent has a good development with multiple early drops, Dredgers, Toad, Aristocrat, Wanderers, things like that, then I would try and ignore their board, just play a blocker, don't exchange blows, and try and level up your Slotbot and your Twisted Fate / Jinx as much as you can. Let them keep the board that they have, and don't try and attack into it too much until you really just dominate them with your champion effects. In this matchup, number one, we're looking at Twisted Fate. We're always looking at Slotbot. Slotbot gets chump block a lot, so it's not as premium in this match, and we're also not going to be doing too much blocking. If you get a hand with multiple, this is kind of important. When you have multiple discard effects like Jury Rig and Flame Chompers in this match, and often in a lot of hapless Aristocrat, dumb 1/1 block plans like Thorny Toad, it's really strong to actually keep the Flame Chompers over the Jury Rig. Don't be scared if you have like Urchin and an Academic draw to get the Chompers down and then challenge their 1-power blocker. Take it out of combat and push for some early damage and get your opponent on the back foot early to really make it difficult for them whenever you're going to level your champions. If you do have a discard, you want to lean more towards, like I said, the Flame Chompers or the Jury Rig. That's not always the case in more control matchups. The 1-power unit is better for applying pressure, but whenever your opponent, any matchup where your opponent has small powered blockers in the early game, the Flame Chompers is a higher value. So overall, just make sure you have Twisted Fate or Jinx in your opener. That's what you want to look for as a champion. Keep your rummages. Picket cards are great, especially because you can tie them well with your Twisted Fate, because they don't have much removal for it. Outside of just spending their whole turn to grasp it, if they even have grasp in their deck, they really can't remove it until turn 6 with Devour, which can be easily countered by any burn spell that you have, or Dwall Hunters countered the same way, even though that one's a little cheaper. So keep an eye out for the Dwall Hunters, and then, guard against the Devour the Depths, and the matchup should be pretty easy if you get any of your champions level soon enough. Lux Thrush is a new popular deck promoted by BBG. I played against BBG playing this deck in the finals of the Giant Slayer Reckoning. Game, you can check it out in a previous video where I released the whole set in grand finals. It was the final game of the grand finals. And I played Casino against this deck, and I did not feel like it was that bad of a matchup. But if you really look at the tools on paper, it seems like it would be bad whenever we talk about single combat, being able to remove any of our champions, concerted strike and take out a big slot bot, the general board presence that they get from Thrush and Lux, the life gain they get off a Radiant Guardian to really counteract our early aggression. Seems like it would be really tough. But one thing to note is that it really depends on your play. So when it comes to mulligans, I'll go ahead and cover that now. We're looking for the same thing we're always looking for. We're looking for a champion, we're looking for a slot bot, and we're looking for some early action. We're not mulligan our rummages, we're always mulligan our suit ups. I know you're probably getting tired of hearing me say this, but that's the hands you're looking for. The way you play them is really the most important thing. So in this matchup, we want to be careful because Grizzled Ranger, you want to make them have to work or commit first to try and turn on the Radiant Guardian. Hopefully, they just don't get a Radiant Guardian down. Make them have to work for it, either single combat or glimpse their own thing. Now they do have a lot of tools to make that happen, and then also to be able to turn on their Radiant Guardian. Thresh is kind of beating because of its high toughness. You definitely want to save your suit ups for a combat where maybe they like Thresh, you'll kill something, you can save it, when you get TF and you pick the card, you do it with full mana up, and then if they try and challenge it with Thresh, you can just suit it up, it'll survive, and then it'll level up. So look to make that play. Don't play your Jinx unless you're going to level it. Whenever you attack with Jinx, you have less to worry about in this matchup because they don't have any barriers, so just full freezes. Unlike a lot of matches in the meta, your Jinx doesn't attack that well. But in this match, you can attack kind of with impunity, trying to push for as much damage as you can. Most of their board presence ends up being, big, thick units like Radiant Guardian or something off of Remembrance or High Toughness Thresh or Lux. So Flame Chompers really, really is important at protecting early. Don't Flame Chompers if we have Thresh, because they'll get the free eats on the 0 power unit. You want to really use your Flame Chompers for the big push turn, like around 5 or 6 whenever you start pushing for damage. If you can really get out ahead of this deck, just make sure that if you are out ahead, try and make it as difficult as possible for them to actually land a Radiant Guardian. Their late game is really strong with their Kindler, and of course the Lux Cannon really takes out all of our threats, so that makes it kind of hard to win a late game. But if we can really outdraw this deck because the only card draw that they have is Glimpse. They do get card advantage off Grizzled Ranger for sure, but it's not too uncommon, remember, to just take 6 from Grizzled Ranger. They attack for 3, take for 3. They attack again, take 3. They'll let them come down with Radiant Guardian, and then they're going to have this chump for a blocker on the next turn. And then you can just continually try and level your champions. A lot of their stuff is going to be dying when we talk about Hapless Aristocrat and the spiders it makes, to Jinx Rockets, as well as the Grizzled Rangers to really go up top, same with Blinding Assault and Evolve Feast tokens. So if we focus on leveling Jinx and Twisted Fate, and then trying to play around single combat and consider strike as best as possible, you do a lot of passing to try and make your opponent to play into you, especially if we have removal spells like Mystic Shot. That way, if they go single combat, if we can blow out their single combat or a concerted strike ever with a removal spell, then that'll be huge. Thresh, like I said, is just the most sticky unit that we can have on 5. But if we have a wide board, we can really take advantage of this Thresh with Flame Chompers. We spend 5 minutes to play this, especially if they don't have a single combat. We can really run over them. Also, these threats do cost a lot of mana, so being able to play them really takes them off being able to also play Radiant Guardians. So look to apply some early pressure if we can. Be mindful of the single damage removal like Vile Feast, to where they don't get a big blowout with Vile Feast. But for the most part, your units can get into combat pretty easy against them. Their in-game really doesn't really take off until turn 6, 7, 8. So you kind of like act out with impunity in the early game. So really take advantage of the fact that their early game is not that good. Get out ahead early, make way for your champions to level, give your opponent the decision what to do when they're trying to stop your end game or try and stop the aggression that's already on them. So be very proactive. Don't keep any removal spells in your opener. Keep action. Noxious Israel is another take on Ezreal, both with Draven and Swain. These matchups are quite tough because they have a serious amount of removal. Not only do they have the beams and the missing shots and the big sideds, they also have Gotcha, and then we also see Ravenous Flock, which is one of the most efficient removal spells in the game. Watch out for the Ravenous Flock because it can take out anything. One important thing to know about the Ravenous Flock, though, and this is going to be very huge, is that if we actually get a unit damaged, like if the opponent actually tries to damage our Jinx with things like Static Shock and not stuns, then we can actually use a suit up in response to Ravenous Flock to set the power to 4/4. And once it's set to 4/4, it is no longer damaged. So look to really blow out the Ravenous Flock or any of their damage-based removal or Culling Strike with a suit up. Being able to set that up can really turn a game into your favor. It still will be difficult because of the sheer amount of removal that these decks play to actually end the game. And before the Leviathans and things start coming down. Sometimes if they play Leviathan, though, they can actually put themselves in a tough position because it costs so much mana, and that we will be able to dump our hand and really exploit the fact that they're playing Swain. Their threats are kind of tough on the mana, basically. A Draven Ezreal list would be more difficult. Definitely make sure that you don't keep any removal in your opening hands. We don't want missing shots or getting sides. We want nothing but gas. We're looking for Slotbot. We're looking for Urchin to give us that early pressure. Slotbot to draw out that Culling Strike. And, of course, any champion to really put the pressure on. Suit up is great. Remember to line up your suit up plays. The suit up plays are difficult to make. Make sure you tune in my stream, link down below, so you can see how I play the suit ups. Check some of my other VODs on Casino to see how I make crazy suit up plays. Because if you're having trouble in these matchups and it seems like you can't beat them, you still can, but it probably has something to do with your suit up play. So that's like probably a video I can make just on how to play suit up in this match. I feel like I've accurately described it as best as I can right now, but watch out for that suit up. Don't forget, suit up also counters the Noxious Guillotine, so you can really blow your opponent out who's banking on something like that. Last matchup I'm going to highlight is the Warmother Control matchup. This deck is a mid-range Nivea Shadow Owl deck that really uses all the Shadow Owl removal, which is damage-based, low damage-based if you think about it. Wild Feast, Avalanche, Withering Wail as removal to really bridge them into a late game. They also have an excessive amount of life gain. Generally, when you play against a deck that has a lot of life gain, early starts, early damage doesn't seem that impressive because they can gain it back. So we really want to punish this deck on card advantage. If we can actually generate enough card advantage, we can set up a couple big turns to really finish the game before our opponent can come to big late game threats like Warmother's Call, Commander Ladros, and Trinamere. Generally, these damage-based removal spells are going to get blown out by suit up, so making good suit up plays, surprise, is very integral to the point of Casino being victorious in this match. So look out for that. Know what kind of removal your opponent has available, given the setup mana that they have. Try and play around it as best as possible. We can blow it out with suit up. That's a good thing. They also have Ruination. I did speak in my 1 hour guide on how to play around Ruination, provide enough pressure, and then keep enough card draw to where you can actually recover post Ruination. So when you play against Ruination decks, you want to make sure that you're gauging that to be able to combat it and make it look like a bad card in your opponent's hand oftentimes. Apply enough pressure, but not too much pressure where you get run over by the Ruination. Eventually your opponent's going to have to play something that's going to end the game, and when they do, that's generally the turn that you're going to capitalize on them going low on mana to be able to just come with a very big explosive board or draw a bunch of cards to set up for a big turn on the next turn. So look to make those plays because this deck does not end the game very soon at all. So and their threats usually cost all the amount of mana that they have. So don't play into them 1-for-1 and give them that advantage and spend your resources in that way. Try and set up a slot bot since they have so much damage-based removal, force them to use Vengeance on it. Come with the next threat. You could have 2 threats, rolling and building an advantage. Either Jinx, TF, Brash Gambler, or the slot bot. If you can get 2 of them rolling at once, force them into a ruination, and then dump up a ward on them, and then push a lot of damage. They won't have time to play their threats, and then you pick your cards, and Brash Gambler draws, and can really pile on to be able to push enough damage through the amount of removal. Honestly, I think this matchup is favorable, despite the amount of removal they have, because it's just really not that efficient. So take advantage of their mana inefficiencies. Watch out for very powerful avalanche plays. You don't want to get blown up by avalanche. So watch how much you commit, and just make sure you keep constant pressure on them. And then make sure you also have one in the cannon for whenever they spend a bunch of mana to play one of their big threats to just close the game the next turn or 2. And with that, I'm going to close out the video. If you have any more questions about the casino deck, I will be looking for any responses down below. You can reach me on Twitter. You can join my Discord. You can always come out for the live stream. We have a great time. Generally use Song Quest and play all kinds of different decks. I'm always down to play casino. If you want to see it play live on stream, jump in the chat. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. I love any feedback. If you see any way that I can make the video better, down below. One of the best things you can do, honestly, is share my content. If you have Reddit, post it on Reddit. If you know someone who plays casino or posts about casino, wants to know about casino, point them in this direction. Hopefully it'll be a useful tool going forward. And again, one love, good vibes. Catch you on the next one.